Good sleep health is important for everyone, and that's especially true for people living with MS. Welcome to this week's edition of Ask an MS Expert. I'm John Strum, and I'm the host of the Real Talk MS podcast. Each week, Real Talk MS reaches thousands of people in more than 100 countries around the world with the news that people affected by MS need to know. My wife Jean lived with progressive MS for 23 years, so I've had a front row seat experiencing all the ways that MS can impact a family. Today, I'll be asking our expert the questions you want answered. Please feel free to post your comments and questions on Facebook, YouTube, or Twitch. MS navigators are online throughout today's live program, answering your questions and connecting you to resources. Getting quality sleep can truly be life-changing for people with MS who deal with issues like spasticity or cognitive changes. But the science behind good sleep can be misunderstood. Joining us today is Dr. Katie Siengsukon. Dr. Siengsukon is a professor of physical therapy, rehabilitation science, and athletic training at the Kansas University Medical Center and the director of the Sleep, Health, and Wellness Lab at the University of Kansas Medical Center, Department of Physical Therapy and Rehabilitation Science. Dr. Siengsukon is with us today to share some of her research on the 4 domains of sleep health and hygiene. Welcome, Dr. Siengsukon. Thanks for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you've done research focusing on the 4 domains of sleep health. Can you briefly explain these 4 domains?
Sure. So with sleep health, we generally consider them to have 4 different domains. Circadian rhythm, which is one of the primary physiological drivers of our sleep. Another important driver of our sleep is sleep drive. So that is also an important domain for sleep health. And then we also focus on pre-sleep arousal. You might also refer to that as stress or kind of management of that stress, because we know that even if you have a really, really well-entrained circadian rhythm and really high sleep drive, if you're really anxious or worried, it's really difficult for those 2 processes to help you sleep. So we also focus on pre-sleep arousal or stress. And then that 4th domain is sleep hygiene. And those are the things that you've probably, read about before, things like, avoiding smoking, too much caffeine, avoiding alcohol, those sorts of things as well.
I think I'll ask for a basic definition. How do you define sleep health? And why is it important for people living with MS to focus on improving their sleep health?
That's a wonderful question. So often we, being the sleep community, healthcare providers, have really focused on sleep disorders. So things like insomnia, sleep apnea, but a diagnosis of a sleep disorder. But really just in the past, several years now, there's been kind of this shift from focusing on sleep disorders to more of a focus on this general term called sleep health, because we all have a sleep health and it occurs in an absence of a sleep disorder. So even if you don't have a sleep disorder per se, you may still have poor sleep health. And sleep health really, it falls on a continuum. So you can have really good sleep health, you can have really poor sleep health, or obviously kind of somewhere in between on that continuum.
I've heard we all move through different sleep cycles each night. Can you explain the different adult sleep cycles?
Sure. And so we do have different sleep stages that you're mentioning. And they're roughly broken into 2 different phases. So we have REM sleep or rapid eye movement sleep, and then non-REM sleep or non-rapid eye movement sleep. And then non-rapid eye movement sleep is actually then subdivided into 3 additional categories. You have the really light stage of sleep called stage 1. And so if you've ever had that sensation where you're kind of laying there attempting to sleep and you kind of startle, that's stage 1. That's that really light stage of sleep. And then a little bit deeper stage of sleep is called stage 2 sleep. And then the deepest stage of sleep is called stage 3 or slow wave sleep or deep sleep. We like to call things lots of different names. But those are the different kind of stages of non-REM and REM sleep. And so we do, as humans, we do cycle through those sleep stages throughout the night. So about every 90 to 120 minutes, you cycle through those different stages, and then you repeat that cycling between non-REM, and REM sleep. And in REM sleep, that's kind of one of the stages that people oftentimes are familiar with because that's the stage where we tend to dream. And so if you do happen to be woken up when you're in REM sleep and you happen to be dreaming, you're more likely to remember that dream that you've had. And what's interesting too is that as humans, we tend to spend more time in the deep stages of sleep in that first half of the night, and we tend to spend more time in the lighter stages of sleep and REM sleep in the second half of the night. So again, like if you happen to wake up in the latter half of the night, you might remember those dreams.
I heard you mention that we cycle through these sleep cycles every 90 minutes or so. Um, if someone falls asleep for less than 90 minutes, does that mean they aren't getting quality sleep?
No, not necessarily. We don't necessarily. I mean, yes, you want to have that cycling between those different stages because there are different physiological processes that are happening at each of those stages. So in an ideal world, you're having that cycling between those different stages of sleep so that those physiological processes can happen. But for somebody who maybe does need to take a nap in the afternoon because they're having really excessive sleepiness in the afternoon, even taking a 20-minute, 30-minute nap could be sufficient to kind of help manage that excessive daytime sleepiness. And so, no, you may not necessarily be cycling through those different stages that you would as you would experience it with nighttime sleep with a longer period of sleep time. But even having a short nap can be helpful as far as kind of, again, reducing that daytime fatigue or that daytime sleepiness.
I know some people will take a nap and wake up feeling refreshed. Other people will take a nap for that same amount of time and they'll wake up and they'll say to themselves, I shouldn't have taken that nap. I feel worse than I did before. Is that connected to these various sleep cycles?
So yes, that could be very well connected. So if you have, if your alarm happens to go off and you happen to have cycled into that deep stage of sleep where you are going to be more sluggish and you happen to wake up during that time, that might be where you are feeling that kind of sense of extra, again, sleepiness that is still lingering, or just kind of fatigue that you have. But again, it's I focus much less on kind of what stages are we actually getting into, but then also too, sometimes when people are taking those afternoon naps, if they do nap for, too long, and again, that's going to really vary on the person. They again can wake up feeling really kind of sluggish, because their body is maybe thinking, am I attempting to sleep for the night? Or is this intended to be just a short daytime nap? So we do generally recommend if people are going to take an afternoon nap to try to reduce it to, 20 to 30 minutes because we also don't want them to then interrupt their nighttime sleep. Because what can happen is if you do take that afternoon nap, that then reduces your sleep drive, and it just takes some time for the sleep drive to build back up so that you're adequately tired and hopefully fall to sleep relatively easy then that night.
So take the reverse situation where someone isn't able to get enough quality sleep at night. Can a daytime nap supplement the sleep they lost at night?
That's a good question. I think ideally, I would encourage that person to, talk with their physician, talk with an expert in sleep to see if there's a way to figure out like what's going on with that nighttime sleep. Like, why are they not getting good sleep at night? Because there's a lot of reasons for that. It could be, if they have an undiagnosed sleep disorder. It could be due to their MS symptoms. It could be due to medication. There's a lot that can go into that. And so ideally it would be, kind of fixing that issue or seeing what that issue might be so that they do get adequate sleep at nighttime. But for sure, if someone then is, kind of attempting those strategies to help them get adequate, good quality sleep at night, and it still, isn't necessarily making them feel as well refreshed as they would like, and they feel like they do have to take a nap in the afternoon, I'm a firm believer that people know their bodies best, and if they feel like they need to take a nap, then by all means, do that. But it definitely, for at least some people, it can indicate like there's something going on that's preventing them from getting a good night's sleep at night. And again, I think it's also that concern of, if you do take a daytime nap, just know that that can reduce your sleep drive And it may mean that you need to delay your typical bedtime a little bit later so that sleep drive is high enough so that you are able to fall asleep. Because sometimes what happens is people will take a nap and then they still try to go to bed at the same time that they typically would. And then they experience frustration because they're not able to fall asleep as quickly and easily as they maybe are used to.
Why is a good sleep environment an important factor when someone's trying to improve their overall sleep quality? And I guess I'll also ask you to explain what that ideal sleep environment looks and feels like.
Good question. So, I mean, in an ideal world, that sleeping environment is comfortable for the person. And typically, what we mean by that is that it's fairly cool. And I don't have some magic temperature to tell you to set your thermostat at, but you typically want it to be somewhat cool on the cool side, and you do want it to be as dark as possible, but safe. So if you do have to get up to use the restroom, you're able to do that safely because we want the environment to be dark because that tells the brain to secrete melatonin, which is one of the really potent hormones that regulates our circadian rhythm. So dark, cool, quiet is ideal because obviously if there's noise that can disrupt our sleep. And then comfortable, if ideally having a comfortable pillow, a comfortable mattress, which again is very individualized on what an individual sees as being comfortable. But I would say, dark but safe is probably the primary thing to be focusing on when you're considering your sleep environment.
Carter tells us that he lives with MS and struggles with frequent daytime sleepiness. But when it's time for him to go to sleep at night, he feels wide awake. I heard you use the term sleep drive before. What does that term mean? And what might Carter be able to do to increase his sleep drive?
That's a good question. And so for any individual, I would be considering those four different domains of sleep health. So I would be asking questions about his circadian rhythm. I'd be asking questions about sleep drive, factors that are contributing both in a positive way and maybe interfering with those factors, but also again, addressing pre-sleep arousal or that stress. And then also sleep hygiene would be that fourth domain I would consider. And so, ways that we can address sleep drive the longer you're awake, the higher your sleep drive is, because there are sleep promoting agents that build up in our brain and make us feel sleepy. But other ways, short of staying up longer to increase sleep drive, other ways is to be physically active, so doing exercise, doing physical activity, but also being cognitively active and socially active as well, are all ways to help increase that sleep drive. But for somebody who, and we see this actually quite a lot with the clients that we work with, is they may feel really sleepy, but then the moment that they get into bed, they feel wide awake. We call it tired but wired. And so what can happen for people is their brain associates the bed with that sense of being awake, which is obviously not what we want. We want your brain to associate the bed with sleep and falling asleep quickly and easily and staying asleep. So we use a strategy called stimulus control. So if someone, gets into bed and is all of a sudden wide awake and can't fall asleep in what feels like 15 to 20 minutes, then we recommend, if they are able to do it safely, to get out of bed and go somewhere else, again, if possible, and do a relaxing and distracting activity. Because again, we don't want the brain to associate the bed with anxiety, with worry, with that notion of like why can't I fall asleep? That frustration with not sleeping. So to help break that association, ideally you get out of bed if you can. For people with MS who maybe do have some mobility limitations, they may not be able to get out of bed safely. Then we recommend that they do that relaxing, distracting activity in bed, such as like listening to music, listening to a book on tape. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it's, again, relaxing and distracting, and then attempt to sleep again at that time. So it's actually a fairly common thing that we see with people, unfortunately, who have challenges sleeping.
So, are there any sleep tracking tools or apps or devices or programs that you recommend to your clients? And if there are, what are some features that someone should consider if they're deciding on which program or device they should be using?
That's a wonderful question. And obviously, there's lots of different devices out there on the market, a lot of different apps. And so there's not necessarily one that I recommend over the other. A lot of them have, somewhat similar characteristics. And so, definitely especially with the wearables that we see that people can purchase, there's definitely some pros and cons, with using a tracking such as a wearable. I think that definitely the pro is that there's much more opportunity to have conversations about sleep. But we also times can see people where it actually kind of makes them more worried about their sleep. I'll have a lot of individuals say, my whatever device told me I only got a little bit of, deep sleep or a little bit of REM sleep, and now they're worried about it. And so I think just using them kind of cautiously and knowing that they're not 100% accurate. Some of them are more accurate than others. And so just using it as a guide to kind of look at trends of your own sleep over time, but definitely still focus on how do you actually feel. If the device is telling you you're only getting 6 hours of sleep and you're feeling well rested and you're feeling wonderful, then I wouldn't worry too much about it because they aren't 100% accurate. And I will say that there's lots of different apps out there as well. If for people who are into using apps, there's some mindfulness apps, there's meditation apps that some people like to use to kind of help promote some of that reduction of pre-sleep arousal. And so I will mention that we have developed a sleep health toolkit that is hosted on the University of Kansas Medical Center webpage, on our lab webpage. And so we do provide those sorts of resources. We have a page on apps and also kind of the pros and cons of wearables. And so I would definitely encourage people to check that out if they're interested in more information.
I know some of these devices can be expensive. We heard from Scott, who tells us he lives with MS and he's on a fixed income. He's wondering what the most cost effective way might be to improve his sleep on a regular basis.
Yeah, and a lot of the strategies to help people sleep better don't require a cost. And so, some of the ways that we encourage people to improve their sleep health, again, we focus on those four different domains. So one of the best ways to entrain your circadian rhythm is to try to wake up about the same time every morning and expose yourself to light first thing in the morning, because light tells your brain to stop secreting that melatonin and it's time to switch from being asleep to being awake. And then to increase sleep drive, doing things like being physically active, cognitively active, socially active, not going to bed until you're feeling adequately tired, and then practicing stimulus control, which we talked about, meaning if you're not sleeping within 15 to 20 minutes, you're getting, ideally, if you can do it safely, get out of bed and do something relaxing and distracting. If you can't do it safely, then do that relaxing, distracting activity in bed. And then again, focusing on that reducing pre-sleep arousal. So doing things like having a regular wind down routine in the evening to help train your brain that what comes next is the bed, which equals sleep. And then also practicing relaxation strategies during the day. And there's lots of relaxation strategies. Ones that we really like is 4-7-8 breathing. So you breathe in for 4 seconds, hold it for 7, exhale for 8. There's also box breathing. There's progressive muscle relaxation. There's mental imagery. Lots of different relaxation strategies. The important thing is to find one that really resonates with you and can actually elicit a relaxation response, and then do that regularly. And then also thinking about that sleep health domain. So thinking about reducing or eliminating nicotine use, limiting alcohol use, and limiting caffeine use as well. And then also considering the environment, like we've talked about, trying to keep it as comfortable, cool, and dark, but safe as possible.
Lucy says she lives with MS and frequently experiences hot flashes throughout the night. What can Lucy do to manage how temperature affects her ability to get quality sleep?
That's a wonderful question, and something that we see quite a bit, especially in women as they start to go through menopause. And so one of the biggest suggestions is to keep her sleeping environment cool, on the cool side. And it might take a little bit of trial and error, because sometimes what happens is people turn down their thermostat, but then they put on a whole lot of extra blankets, but then they fall asleep with all those blankets, and then that helps, and then that adds to that hot flash and the nighttime sweating. And so it might take a little bit of trial of error of finding that cool temperature and the right number of blankets. And then another strategy is to have a fan on, a ceiling fan or a box fan, to help keep that air circulating throughout the night. And then another strategy for people who have hot flashes and have nighttime sweating is to be prepared for that. And so if you do happen to wake up and you're having the hot flash or have woken up and you're sweaty, having a change of clothes nearby to make it as quick and easy as possible. Sometimes people will keep, a towel that they can put over the sweaty spot so they can fall back to sleep. And then I think knowing that for most people that it is a temporary thing, and so helping to kind of manage that and knowing that it will get better as you pass through that stage of life. And then obviously if it is becoming disruptive, there are medications that can help as well. And so I would definitely say also talk with your physician if it is something that is very burdensome to you.
I think when people consider physical therapy, they think about it in terms of movement or maybe balance and strength. You're a physical therapist who specializes in sleep. So you're the perfect person to ask, how does a physical therapist assist someone in improving their sleep health?
That's a wonderful question. And you're absolutely right. I mean, physical therapists typically are focused on things like, function and walking and bed mobility and improving function. But we know that sleep is an important piece of that. We know that sleep is an important piece of helping people recover, helping people feel better, improving quality of life. And so really, as the physical therapy profession has kind of evolved from treating people who have an impairment or who have a functional disability, but also focusing more so on that whole person, a more holistic approach, and also on prevention. And so we know things like sleep health, nutrition, stress management, those are all really important aspects of overall health and well-being and also prevention of chronic conditions. And so that's why physical therapists have kind of moved into that domain of health promotion, including sleep health. And so, physical therapists, some may feel more comfortable than others about talking about sleep health and promoting sleep health. But my goal is that people are talking to their patients about those four domains of sleep health and those strategies that we've kind of talked about that people can use then to help enhance those four different domains of sleep health.
And is someone who's working with a physical therapist on their sleep health, is that something that's usually covered by their insurance?
Also a great question. And so obviously it's going to depend on the type of insurance that they're on. And oftentimes too, when physical therapists are talking to clients about health and wellness, that education piece is often embedded while you are, practicing those functional skills that you're trying to learn or you're trying to practice or you're trying to improve on or you're practicing your home exercise program. So we typically are embedding that kind of education about health promotion and wellness as we are doing those other aspects of what you might consider kind of more typical physical therapy. But most major insurance carriers will cover physical therapy.
We heard from Clay, who says he has difficulty falling asleep. He also feels wakeful and restless throughout the entire night. So his MS specialist has ordered a sleep study. Can you explain what a sleep study is and what it entails?
Yes, and that's fantastic that he mentioned having challenges sleeping with his healthcare provider, and the healthcare provider is recommending investigating that further because we do know that unfortunately in people with MS, there's a higher prevalence of sleep disorders. So things like insomnia, sleep apnea, restless leg syndrome, and other common sleep disorders. And so that is one of the common first steps is to undergo an overnight sleep study. They can be done in a laboratory setting where you actually go to a facility and you do the sleep study in that facility. And they'll put sensors on different parts of your body, especially on your head, so that they are looking at the activity of your brain. But then they'll also put sensors on your face to look at muscle activity there, or sensors on your legs and arms to look at muscle activity. Usually there'll be straps that go around your chest and your abdomen to look at your breathing. There's usually going to be a sensor on your finger to look at your oxygen levels. And usually also a cannula to assess breathing in your nose. So there's quite a lot of hookup that goes on in to doing an overnight sleep study that's done in a laboratory. Thankfully now, a lot of times the first step is actually to do a home sleep study, and those devices are much less involved and less uncomfortable. And so there's still there's different ways that they work, but they'll oftentimes again have kind of a band that maybe goes around your head. They might assess your breathing. It kind of depends a little bit on all what goes into the overnight study. But oftentimes those will be done first because if they can diagnose, say, sleep apnea, that it's really obvious that you have sleep apnea, then you don't necessarily have to do an in-person or in lab study at that point. But if it's not conclusive with that home study, then you might have to kind of go to the next step and do that in laboratory sleep study.
And how does the data from that sleep study help to diagnose and treat the issues that are causing someone's poor sleep?
And so the sleep studies, they can diagnose some sleep disorders, such as sleep apnea. So that will look at the number of apneas and hypopneas that you have. So the periods of time that you either stop breathing or you have a reduction in your breath. And they'll look at arousals that happen with those apnea and hypopneas. And then for sleep disorders like periodic limb movement of sleep, it will look at how often your legs move throughout the night. And so there's different data points that they'll get from those sleep studies to either diagnose a sleep disorder or to rule out a sleep disorder. It can also obviously be very helpful as well to know that, no, you don't have X disorder or Y disorder, but perhaps it's insomnia instead. That it's not necessarily a diagnosis of inclusion as it is from excluding certain disorders. And then, of course, other diagnostic criteria for insomnia as well. So yes, they can be very helpful for physicians as they are diagnosing someone with a sleep disorder.
Well, you've shared some valuable insights and some great solutions for improving our sleep health. What would you say is the top takeaway that you'd like our viewers to remember and to use?
Thank you for that question. So I think one of my biggest takeaways is that sleep issues are very common in people who have multiple sclerosis. And in working with people with MS, I oftentimes hear them say things like, well, I have MS, of course I don't sleep well, or of course I'm fatigued. And so I would definitely encourage people, if they are having excessive daytime sleepiness or they're not sleeping well at night, to talk to their healthcare provider about that. Because it could be that they do have an underlying sleep issue, or there can be strategies to help them sleep better. And so definitely, I think the biggest thing is to, if you are having challenges sleeping, to talk with your healthcare provider about it.
Well, thank you for being with us today, Dr. Siengsukon.
Thank you very much for having me.
Today's program survey has now been posted in the chat for your feedback. Please take a minute and complete it. It helps us create programs and topics with you in mind. Please be sure to visit the National MS Society's website for information and resources on MS, connection opportunities, and ways for you to get involved. You can also connect with an MS navigator to receive personalized support by phone, email, or through the Society's website by chat. A recording of today's program will be posted on the MS Society's website at nationalmssociety.org/MSexpert, as well as on Facebook and YouTube. Finally, I'll invite you to join me each week on Real Talk MS, where we continue the conversation on the podcast that we start here. You can find Real Talk MS on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you find your favorite podcasts. Thanks for joining us for Ask an MS Expert. We'll see you next week.